Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Everyone, welcome to today's presentation, which is Surah Yusuf, chapter 12. And we will share the explanation of verses from 36 to 53. These are the references, and this is our contact in case of any question or query for those once the presentation goes on YouTube. Summary of the verses covered so far, 1 to 35. Yusuf had achieved the status of Mohsineen through his earnest efforts and had also matured in age by spending many years in the household of Aziz in Egypt. We remember that Yusuf was put into a well and then he ended up as a slave in Egypt. So this is from where I have put down the first point. His experience included knowledge of Wahi and its application, the basic human psyche and its limitations without the guidance of Wahi, and he had the full assurance from Allah that he is on Sirat al-Mustaqim. Allah's Wahi leaves no doubt about this when it is used as an external criterion. Now this point needs a slight explanation, which essentially means that we have whole of the Quran. And the story of Yusuf, or account of Yusuf, guides us that how to guide ourselves using Allah's Wahi. So wherever there is an issue, we should go back to the Quran and see which value is applicable over here. And this point can be brought up for further discussion during our question answer session. Yusuf, having become muttaqi, faced the challenges imposed by the wife of Aziz, who was guided by her base desires and her companions in crime, that is the other woman. Yusuf did not compromise. So Yusuf stood up against Batil very strongly and did not budge an inch. He opted for imprisonment deliberately, related it to Allah, and this did not stress him out and put any doubts in his mind. He remained firm-footed and patient and became determined to get through this phase of imprisonment together with other fellow prisoners. So the point over here is that Yusuf did not go into prison complaining or being stressful that what has happened to me. He did not feel anxiety or anything like that. He opted for it. He knew that this path through the prison will take him to point of eminence. And Allah will not leave him alone. So this reassurance we get from the study of the Quran. He looked for more opportunities to develop himself in the environment of the prison. So he did not sit over there idle and doing nothing. And this will become very clear as we go through today's verses. He now had a fairly good picture of the strengths and weaknesses of the system before him. However, he was not kind of individual who will sit and do nothing in the prison. He used it to expand his knowledge further within the physical restraints of the prison. He felt free despite being constrained physically. The Quran has not provided any further details of this. Why Quran has not provided further details? Because we have to figure it out in the light of the whole of the Quran. There is a lot in this aspect, and this will become very clear to us as we will go through other surahs. Now we look at the verses 36 to 37. Yusuf's next phase commences in the prison. So just imagine Yusuf has landed up in the prison now, and he is now faced with a different situation. Previously, he had some kind of freedom, even as a slave and a servant, he had some freedom where he could physically go around, but now he's confined to the four walls of the prison. The first verse is وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ سَجْنَ فَتَيَانِ قَالَ أَحْدُهُمَا إِنِّي أَرَانِي آسِرُ خَمْرًا وَقَالَ الْآخَرُ إِنِّي أَرَانِي أَحْمِلُ فَوْقَ رَأْسِي خُبْزًا تَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْهُ نَبِّئْنَا بِتَأْوِيلِهِ إِنَّا نَرَاكَ مِنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So with the Yusuf, there were two other prisoners also were imprisoned, and they saw some dream, and now they are discussing it with Yusuf. Together with Yusuf, two other young men arrived in the prison. One day, one of them said that I have seen in a dream that I am pressing grapes to make wine. The other one said that I see that I am carrying bread on my head and birds are eating it, that is by pecking at it. Tell us what is the meaning and conclusion of this, because you appear to be a very wise and righteous man. That is, they said that you appear to be among the Muslimin. The second verse is Qala la yatikuma ta'amun turzaqanihi illa nabatukuma bitawilihi qabla an yatiyakuma. Zalikuma mimma alamni rabbi inni taraktu millatan qawmin la yu'minuna billahi wa hum bil akhirati hum kafirun. Just as a messenger of divine messages does not let any opportunity slip from his hand for this purpose, Yusuf thought that these young men are fully attentive at this time to listen to him. Therefore, the voice of Tauheed should be put into their ears. So he said to them that I will tell you the interpretation of your dreams before your meal time. But first, at least hear who I am and what the message is. Whatever I say is not from myself, rather I say it based on that knowledge which I have received from my Rabb. First of all, hear this, that I am not on the path of those who neither accept Allah nor have assurance in the hereafter. So Yusuf makes it very clear to them that don't think that I am from the party of the king. So I do not accept the law as it is in this land. So he is telling them very clearly and spelling out his own position where he stands vis-a-vis the people around him. Dreams of companions in the prison and Yusuf's response. So I put down some comments here. Being in prison now, Yusuf interacts with other prisoners and the other prisoners recognize the status of Muslimin. So it is not just two prisoners. Yusuf must be interacting with everyone around, and it's a new world which is exposed to him. And he makes best use of it. Try to find out the issues and problems of the prison system. Two fellow prisoners who are treated as equal human beings by Yusuf approach him and in a frank manner explain their respective dreams to him and request a possible interpretation. So these two prisoners, they saw that this person is totally different because of their interaction with him. So they found him very knowledgeable and very much current on what is going on in their land. By being with them in the prison through spending time together, Yusuf has picked up some knowledge about their backgrounds and the crimes committed by them because of which they have landed in prison. So by now, we should assume that Yusuf knew that on what charges and on what punishment these two guys are in the prison. And of course, he will know about others as well. But over here, Quran has only referred to two prisoners. Yusuf, who already had an insight into the judicial system of the state, now gains more knowledge by coming across more crime stories from the prisoners interned there. Next point is keeping in view his aim and purpose of life. Yusuf uses this period of imprisonment to enhance his understanding about human affairs in the land of Egypt. He uses this opportunity to share the guidance of Wahi with these two prisoners as they are prone to paying attention to Yusuf for their own need. And it is a lesson for us. We have seen that the people who are in trouble because of law of mukafat, because of the deeds they have sent forward, and then they land up in trouble. And even if we know it, such people are more prone to listening to the message of the Quran because they are in trouble. And Quran has also pointed in some verses where it says that when human beings have trouble, they call out for Allah. They start praying. Yusuf explains the fundamental value of Tauheed and to avoid Shirk. Next verse is وَاتَّبَعْتَ مِلَّةَ أَبَائِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ مَا كَانَ لَنَا أَن نُشْرِكَ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ ذَلِكَ مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْنَا وَعَلَى النَّاسِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُونَ. So before explaining the interpretation of their dreams, Yusuf is now taking this opportunity to communicating the message of Allah, the message of Wahi, sharing it with these two prisoners. You may have heard the names of Ibrahim, Ishaq, and Yaqub. I am from among their progeny and follow their path. We do not associate anyone with Allah. Finding this reality that no one is to be included in the sovereignty of Allah is a great blessing of Allah, which He has bestowed on us as well as on other people who follow this path. But many do not recognize the value of this supreme blessing of His. So he in a nutshell tells them that I do not commit shirk. So I am a firm believer, a firm iman in the Wahi of Allah. And then he directly addresses them by saying, Ya sahibi sijne arbabun mutafarriquna khairum amillahu wahidul qahar. I will explain to you this point in Tauheed in another way. An individual is the servant of just one master, and that master is also such that he possesses all kinds of authorities, and another individual is in the service of many masters at the one time. You tell me whose life will be lived better. It is obvious that the life of the individual who is the servant of one master who continues to fulfill all of his needs will be better. So he gives an example from the world around them, from the human world, that if you are a master of more than one person individual, you will be pulled between the two and you will have a problem in your life. And over here we are talking about one master, one entity, one Allah, and who can meet all our needs as well. So he provides a comparison to set the scene right for them to understand. Yusuf avails this opportunity to share the message. Yusuf tells them clearly his own position in relation to the system in which they are imprisoned, the deen of Yaqub, Ishaq, Ibrahim. It looks that people in Egypt had some inkling about and had heard about the deen of Allah. So the way he is explaining it looks as if they had some kind of information, some even hazy picture about it. He points to the state of affairs in the land and states that the issues they were all facing are due to the wrong system in the land. He sums up Tauheed by pointing to Shirk and by giving an example of being in the service of one master rather than being a servant of many masters. This is no way to live life as human beings possessing choice and intent and numerous realizable potentials. Then he points to the state of the world in which they lived, where human efforts were not producing the optimum results of their efforts. So that is why he states, Aksara Nase La Yashkurun, that your efforts and the efforts of everyone around, they are not coming out optimally because you are in the wrong system, or we are in the wrong system. Wahi is the fadl of Allah, and when we do not benefit from it, then we deprive ourselves of all those blessings associated with the functioning of the system of deen within the guidance of Allah. Now, the reality of the human system is laid bare in one verse. Now, the next verse sums up a number of points. ما تعبدون من دونه إلا أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان إن الحكم إلا لله أمر ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه ذلك الدين القيم ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. Indeed, this is the very condition of those who adopt obedience to one Allah, and in contrast to them is that of those who accept different masters as their God. You people bow down before different gods. Have you ever paid attention to the reality and truth of these gods? It is merely that these are a few names which you and your fathers have given. Otherwise, they possess no reality and status of their own. Very important. These are some names which you have contrived, concocted, invented because this suits you. And this is because of your own desires. So you create your own gods and then you worship them. You are told that these represent Allah. This is also false. Allah has sent no seal of approval for them, that He has given them some authority. Because if there is no authority in the Quran, in Allah's wahi, that means they are all false, they are batil. Remember, Allah is the sole possessor of power and authority. Other than Him, no one else has the right to govern. His command is that do not adopt the authority and obedience of anyone else, because that is how we degrade ourselves. And the system around Yusuf at that time also degraded human beings. And Yusuf was a prime example of that. This is the established and balanced map for life, but most people do not know this truth. Now, over here, I have quoted a verse from Surah Al-Ma'idah, which I thought sums it up what Yusuf said. The Quran supports the criteria spelled out by Yusuf. So as we know through the Tasriful Ayat, we can always expand these things which Yusuf had proclaimed to these two prisoners. Inna anzalna Tawrata fiha hudam wa nurun yahkumu bihal nabiyyuna allazina aslamu lillazina hadu wa rabbaniyina wal ahbaru bimastuhfizu min kitabillahi wa kanu alayhi shuhada'a fala takhshawu nasa wa akhshawni wa la tashtaru bi ayati samanan qalilan wa man lam yahkum bima anzalallahu fa ulaika humul kafirun. The account of Deen, i.e. the law of Allah, is this, that we sent down the Torah, which is a collection of all those scriptures which Bani Israel received from time to time. It had guidance like every divine book towards the correct path and had light in it. Their Anbiya, who were all Muslims, i.e., bound down before the divine law, used to decide on the matters of these people who called themselves Jews, though they should also have called themselves Muslims, according to this light and guidance. And their scholars and learned ones also used to give directions according to these scriptures which were sent towards their Anbiya, and of which these scholars and learned were deputed to preserve. And they were also claimants of being guardians. So these scholars and learned people, they were supposed to guard the message of Allah. And instead what they did, it is before us. And the same situation is continuing now. We are lucky and fortunate that Allah has given preservation and protection to the Quran, the original Wahi. They were specifically told that decisions of all affairs are to be carried out according to these codes, and do not be fearful of people. Only be fearful of going against the divine law. Do not start the business of selling the law. Remember, the person who does not decide according to this law of Allah, which is sent down by him, is kafir. Even if he may be claiming to have iman in this law, this is the very differentiation between a kafir and a mu'min. Very powerful verse when it says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. So for us is a great instruction in it, and we should keep it in mind all the time. These are some names invented by you and your forefathers. So over here I put down some reflections as I understood them. Verse 1240 merits our careful reflection. The man-made world we see around is pursuing this aspect so glaringly that we do not have to go far to get evidence for it. For example, media, political rhetoric, celebrity culture, festivities, for example, Olympics, professional sports across the world, and these are all worshipped. Statues, which are the physical symbols, idols carved by human minds, and we had a presentation on that. Just apply the criteria of the hereafter and then see which human acts carry their effects to the next life and which do not. So the criteria for us from the Quran is that whatever we are witnessing around us, we should see and extend it, extrapolate it into the future and see that what goes beyond that and what ends with that. This fact is repeated in verse 53:23, and in this verse here, zan is added, conjecture, about which is batil, we are never sure about it, is added and summed up by stating whatever their selves desire, intellect and emotions outside the domain of Wahi. That whatever they wanted, whatever their desires dictated to them, they did it. Next is the Quran states clearly that check out these names and idols by using the criteria put forward by it. That is why Quran says, Ma anzalallahu biha min sultan. So Quran provides the criteria to verify whether something is haq or whether something is batil. And this is what we are doing through our presentations. And then it strengthens it further by stating that inna hukmu illa lillah. So Quran does not make any exception over here. It says the hukum has to be from Allah, and which is in the Quran. And it then emphatically states through the lips of Yusuf, Zalikul Deenul Qayyimu. So in this one verse, it sums up three very important points, including that how human beings have created their own idols. That this is what the deen of Allah is. If we decide to be outside this value system, then according to the law of requital, be prepared to reap the consequences. So according to the law of requital, where we are in this world as of today, we can look back and see how did we reach this point in time and what is going to come next. We may not be able to anticipate the events, but at least we know that the law of requital is functioning in our life and in our world. This also points to the psychological makeup of Yusuf. He rejects the system of Pharaoh in all its aspects by declaring, Innal hukmu illa lillah. And on this we will see once we go to the next presentation. And we need to assume that he must have raised this issue with him when he holds a meeting with him. More on this later in the next presentation. Dreams of the prisoners interpreted by Yusuf. Now, after explaining this to these two prisoners, and through this, Yusuf also strengthened his own self, because by declaring that what he is and what is his belief system and what is his iman, he is now told them that that this is the background with which I'm going to explain your situation. Ya sahib sijne amma ahtukuma fa yaski rabbahu khamran wa ammal akharu fa yuslabu fataqulu tayru min rasihi uzi al amru allazi fihi tastafiyan. After this sermon, Yusuf said to them, now hear the interpretation of your dreams. One of you who is pressing grapes will serve drinks to his master, and the second one will be hanged on the gallows where birds will peck at his head with their beaks. This is the interpretation of the dreams about which you inquired. Not only an interpretation, just view this as absolutely decreed. And then, of course, this is my evaluation. That is why he says, that what you have asked me, this is how it is going to pan out from the circumstances which you have explained. وَقَالَ الَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِنْهُمَا أَذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ فَأَنْسَهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. So one of them, the one among them about whom Yusuf had assessed, the one who was supposed to serve drinks to the king, that he will be released. He told him that when you go to your master, that is your Rabb, just say in the Rabbika, do mention to him those things which I have told you. So Yusuf mentioned to him that I have given you an explanation of what Tauheed means. And also you know that what is the situation in the prison, and then on what trumped up charges I have been imprisoned here. Then you should go and explain to your Rabb or to your king. Hence he was released from the prison, but Shaitan made him forget to mention these things to his master. Of course, these guys were not interested in Tauheed or anything like that. So the moment he came out, his conscientious level was very, very low, so he forgot. And Shaitan over here means his own desires made him forget it. And this is important because he forgot. And he had to forget it because the moment he released, he was so happy. He didn't care that Yusuf is there and he's in prison on trumped up charges, or he's talking about Tauheed or the system being wrong. And this we see around us as well. When we pass on the messages to people, they just forget it very quickly. At the time, we might see them paying attention, but then they forget. And this is an instruction for us that we should not forget. We should keep reminding ourselves all the time. Many years passed thus in this matter, and Yusuf remained in the prison. I looked at this rule. Bid'ah means about 3 to 10 years of period this is. And my own conclusion is it's possibly the nearer to 3 years. But we should not get into it. When Quran says few years, and that should be enough. Dreams of the prisoners were reflection of their thoughts and circumstances. Over here, I put down some thoughts. Yusuf, being in the company of these 2 fellow prisoners and many others, had picked up the details of their background, which had landed them in prison in the first place. Second is, in the case of the first prisoner, he realized that his crime is not such that he will stay in prison for long and will go back to the palace of the king to serve drinks to him again. Being a manager of drinks in the palace, he may have done something and fallen out of favor, leading to this imprisonment. Quran has not gone into the details of the nature of the crime of these 2 prisoners, so there is no point in speculating about it. We can only say that these were their conditions as they stated in their dreams. The second prisoner, whose crime is not mentioned in the Quran, appears to have done something which warranted capital punishment as per the law of the king. Now this is important because he was being given that capital punishment under the law of the king. And Yusuf concluded that he is going to be hanged by the gallows outside, where birds will peck on his head. Probably body will remain hanging for many days. And this was not uncommon at that time. Even today in backward countries, this is always a possibility. The rest is left to our imagination. This tells us a lot about human respect and dignity under the king. Even today, people in underdeveloped societies use this kind of punishment. And this is a very low level of emotive state of these kind of people. The Quran has also drawn a picture of a prison of that time, which is not different from what we find today around us, where innocents are locked up, very long incarcerations, and also those convicted of petty crimes. We need to reflect seriously on taking away the physical freedom of individuals and the consequent influence on human psyche, something to reflect for another time. So I put down this comment because it's a food for thought as well. It is just not a story of Yusuf, but there is a lot of instruction for us as of today. King describes his dream and looks for an interpretation. Now, what happens is that those years have passed. Yusuf is in the prison. He's making use of that time, whatever he has within the facilities or within the means available within the prison. And the time comes that the king, وَقَالَ الْمَالِكُ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقْرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ يَأْكُلُهُنَّ سَبْعٌ إِجَافٌ وَسَبْعَ سُنبُلَاتٍ خُضْرٍ وَآخَرَ يَابِسَاتٍ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ أَفْتُونِي فِي رُؤْيَايَ إِن كُنتُمْ لِلرُّؤْيَا تَعْبُرُونَ قَالُوا أَضْغَاثُ أَحْلَامٍ وَمَا نَحْنُ بِتَأْوِيلِ الْأَحْلَامِ بِعَالِمِينَ. So what happens is that the king also sees a dream. And the dream is, one night the king saw in a dream that there are 7 fat cows which are being devoured by 7 thin cows. And possibly this could also refer to the fact that rich people are going to be devoured by the poor people at some point in time. Or probably this was his fear that things are not great under his kingdom and people might rise against the rich. And 7 years of corn are green and 7 are dried up. He narrated his dream to his courtiers and said to them that if you can interpret dreams, then tell me what is the meaning of my dream. They replied that this is not a dream, but merely a distressed thought, and we do not know the interpretations of such kinds of distressed thoughts. He had a pretty incompetent people around him, and probably the sycophants and the flatterers who were more interested in passing time, so they didn't have much. If this is also an instruction for us that we should have competent and highly efficient and eminent people around us once we have power, rather than getting useless people around us who are only yes men. So they didn't have a word to explain this dream of the king. وَقَالَ الَّذِي نَجَا مِنْهُمَا وَادَّكَرَ بَعْدَ أُمَّةٍ أَنَا أُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِتَأْوِيلِهِ فَأَرْسِلُونِ. Now this guy who had come out of the prison and whose dream was interpreted by Yusuf very effectively and realistically, now he remembered, because he was serving drink to the king, so he must have heard it maybe directly from the king or from people around him. The one from among the 2 prisoners who had been released remembered Yusuf in connection with his dream after a period of time. He said, "Let me go to the prison, I will let you know the interpretation of this dream." Now he might have even remembered that he forgot to mention to the king, but anyway, it was too late. In any case, we don't know if he had mentioned to the king and king would have listened to him. The king of Egypt dreams and invites this interpretation from his courtiers. Now I put down some points here. The dream of the king is the state of his inner concerns about the state of affairs in his kingdom. This inquiry into the matter of Yusuf alone is enough to tell him that things are not okay. It appears that the king was of a slightly higher intellect than the rest of those Aziz and those women who did what they did to Yusuf. As briefly explained in the first presentation, our dreams reflect our state of psyche and the issues which we face in our life. Remember, we covered these points in our first presentation. Dreams may reflect on our past and present and concerns about our future. All 4 dreams quoted in this surah are reflections on the circumstances and environment in which people lived and experienced their challenges of life. Next is, the courtiers of the king could not have interpreted the dream and even other issues, as they were not paying attention to the state of affairs under the king. Because most of the people who are at the top, who serve in a lower position with the most powerful person, they are only interested in passing day to day. And they are not interested in what is going on around them. They are very much into their own desires and into their own self-interest. Just passing days type of employees. Yusuf had no difficulty in interpreting this dream, as with the dreams of the prisoners, that the state of affairs under the king was not good and required intervention by someone who knows the disease, its prescription, and then can implement this prescription effectively. So Yusuf had access to Wahi. So that is why people who have access to Wahi, like we understand the Quran, we can see the events around us, that what trend they are on and what is going to come next. For example, the system which is man-made always goes into decline gradually with the passage of time. Yusuf had figured it out because of his access to the light of Wahi, just the way we have acquired access to the Quranic reality, and also through looking at the affairs of the state in the light of the guidance of Wahi. Fault lines of any system become exposed very clearly and in finer detail in the light of the Quran. So this is the point of instruction for all of us, that what is going on in the world around us, we should keep a very keen eye on that. And what is going on in this world, we should progressively check it and be ahead of time rather than move with the time. Yusuf explains the meaning of the dream of the king. This is very interesting. Yusufo ayyuhal sadiqo aftina fi sab'in bakaratin samanin yakuluhunna sab'un ijafun wasab'i sumbulatin huzrin wa akhara yabisatin la alli arji'u ila nasi la'allahum ya'lamun. Now this guy who had gone out of the prison and the manager of drinks of the king, he came back to the prison and he addresses Yusuf as ayyuhal sadiqo, because he knew it, that he is among Muhsinin, and said to Yusuf that, "Oh, you who gives correct interpretations, tell us the interpretation of this dream." He doesn't, Quran doesn't say that he apologized or he felt sorry or anything, because people at that level, they have a very low level of consciousness. They are only interested to fulfill their own desires. And over here, he was here to find out the interpretation of the dream so that he could go back and get some favors from the king. That there are 7 fat cows which are being devoured by 7 thin cows. And there are 7 green ears of corn and 7 dry ones. I will make the interpretation reach those people who have sent me here for this purpose. From this, they will recognize your work and warn you. So it's very interesting that he says, "Ilam nasil Allahum ya'lamun," so that these people will then understand that what is your work. And I think this also points to his realizing the mistake which he has made. قَالَ تَزْرَعُونَ سَبْعَ سَنِينَ دَابًا فَمَا حَصَدتُّمْ فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنبُلِهِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تَأْكُلُونَ ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ صَبْرٌ شِدَادٌ يَأْكُلْنَ مَا قَدَّمْتُمْ لَهُنَّ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تُحْسِنُونَ ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ عَامٌ فِيهِ يُغَاثُ النَّاسُ وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. I put all the 3 verses together because they are addressing the same issue, and it's better to put them together and explain it together. So Yusuf replied, Yusuf, without saying a word of complaint that you did not fulfill your promise. See the character of Yusuf, how high it has become, what a developed self he has achieved and attained. And this is a great instruction for all of us, that we should look at the events around us and get instruction and get guidance from this. And to be able to have a good control of our own consciousness, our own annoyance, our own even feelings which might be negative, and we should have a full control of them if we are looking for a very eminent job. Said to him that I will tell you the interpretation of this dream and also that solution through which your country will be saved from the impending devastation. So listen, you people should farm and cultivate with great hard work for 7 years. And when you harvest the crop, then except for that grain which you need for your daily food, leave the remainder of the grain in its sheath so that it remains preserved from infestation. So he directly goes to the solution. After this, there will come 7 such years which will be of great hardship due to drought. During this time of drought, all the grain which you will have stored will become of use to you. You must save a certain amount from this which can be used for seeding, because in the following year there will be abundant rain, plentiful grain will be produced, and also grapes whose juice people will press. Now, what I've done over here is I put down some comments. Yusuf interprets the concerns of the king manifested through his dream. First one is, by now Yusuf had acquired a very good understanding of the state of affairs about the society of Egypt at all levels. Intellectually, he completely rejected the system of government being managed by the king and his cohorts. He expressed it eloquently when he addressed the 2 companions in the prison and summing it up by declaring, "Innal hukmu illa lillah." So he has made it very clear to us, those who want to get help from this guidance. He came to this conclusion that the system in all respects needed an overhaul and needs to be gradually replaced with a system based on the values of Wahi. This is what he discusses with the king later on. He diagnoses the problem, and from his understanding through observation of the patterns of weather, i.e. cyclic alternation between good weather and then dry weather, there is a need to plan ahead now rather than doing nothing. So he picks it up that he must have observed it himself. There might be some books and knowledge available at that time. But anyway, what the solution which he has suggested indicates his very deep perception and his very high intellectual acumen. Most human problems in the world are due to going for immediate benefits. Remember, we had talked about delayed gratification in life. In our life and not planning on a very long-term basis, we ignore the law of requital. Ignoring the life of the hereafter is part of this cycle. Next is note here that Yusuf did not complain to his fellow ex-prisoner because that was not an issue regarding his forgetfulness, because of which he lingered in the prison for another few years. Secondly, even if this fellow had mentioned to the king, there is no assurance that the king would have listened to him. So this is another point which we should keep it in mind, that sometimes we make an effort, but the response is not what we expect. For example, we send letters to different people and some of them reply, some do not. But that should not discourage us from doing what we are doing in the light of the Quran. The strong self that Yusuf had at this stage of his life and his firm conviction in Allah that his being among the Muslimin will ultimately lead to the achievement of his well-defined aim. This is a great lesson for us. Because if we are sure of our path, that is our Sirat al-Mustaqim, and we know that we are doing our best under the guidance of the Quran, in the light of the Quranic value system, then we should be absolutely assured that ultimately success will come in our direction. And that is important for us to keep treading on this path. And finally, we need to keep the overall picture of our struggle of our life in mind, and this helps to remove any doubts, suspicions, and frustrations. If things get delayed, time is always on the side of Mu'mineen, because our life is not going to end with death. So why should we worry that the time is passing and I may not be able to do it before my death? That is not an issue. Issue is to remain stuck on Sirat al-Mustaqim and follow the Quran within the constraints of the society in which we live. And if not in this life, our life will not end with death. We just keep making our best efforts as allowed by our circumstances. Now, next is Yusuf declines to exit the prison, asks for an investigation. Now, this is very interesting because now once this guy goes back to the king and tells him that this is the interpretation of this dream, and obviously the king now becomes very much interested because this is what fits on the situation which king is facing in his country. So this appeals to him, and now he wants Yusuf to come out and meet him. وَقَالَ الْمَالِكُ قُوتِنِي بِهِ فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ قَالَ أَرْجِعْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَاسْأَلْهُ مَا بَالُ النِّسْوَةِ اللَّتِي قَطَعْنَ أَيْدِيَهُنَّ إِنَّ رَبِّي بِكَيْدِهِنَّ عَلِيمٌ. When the person who communicated this interpretation and solution to the king, he was taken aback and he ordered that this prisoner be brought to him who has given this interpretation and solution. And when the envoy of the king came to Yusuf and told him to come out of the prison, Yusuf said, I do not wish to leave the prison in this way on the basis of charitable mercy. Go to your master, that is, he's called as Rab, and say to him that he should first of all have my case investigated from the beginning, so that this should be made clear what were the circumstances of the cutting of hands by the woman and how great a snare it was which was used to entrap him. At this moment in time, the knowledge of this fact is only with my Rabb, but after investigation of the case, it will become common knowledge as to who was at fault. If I am proven innocent in this way, then I will come out of the prison. Absolutely brilliant aspect is covered in this verse, and a great instruction for all of us. That Yusuf was put into the prison on a trumped up charge. And he cannot come out of that prison because the law of requital hasn't really reached to its end. And at this point, only Allah knows, and of course those ladies and Aziz and others knew that he's innocent, but it hasn't come out for all to know, including the king. And over here, it means that Allah knew it, but Yusuf is making sure that everyone around should also know about his innocence. One. Second is what is going on in the land in the name of justice. Why did Yusuf ask the king for an inquiry? Now, I put down some points here, which I thought are very pertinent in relation to our situation as of today. Yusuf, being on the right path, was locked up on a trumped-up false charge, and the verdict was unjust and needed to be concluded either way. That is, either he should be proved a criminal or he should be proved innocent. Being a Mormon, he could not simply exit the prison without his chaste nature being established in the eyes of the public, the higher echelons, and the king. His eminence demanded that while Allah knows he is innocent, the country did not know the full facts. People need to know the wrongs, crimes taking place in their society. An important lesson for us is to hold an inquiry into incidents and for the facts to be established and justice to be done transparently. Next point is this inquiry will also let Aziz know that Yusuf never had any malign intent against his wife. Though Aziz knew first time, but possibly second time, it may have caused some aspersion on Yusuf. The inquiry also let the king know the issues of injustice under his rule, and this also established the character of Yusuf and his eminence before the king. He was already impressed by the interpretation of his dream by Yusuf, and this inquiry further strengthened his case for subsequent elevation to a position of authority in the land. Evil needs to be confronted, otherwise it spreads like wildfire. Because people whisper, people around them were not mu'mineen. They were very basic human beings who were just following their emotions. And these people need to know that what is going on in their land in their name. Finally, one important point needs elaboration. There is an instruction here for us that despite the fact that leaving the prison immediately may be very attractive to a non-Mormon, for a Mormon it is important to think through all the pros and cons in light of the guidance of the Quran. This account served as a guidance for Rasulullah and his companions. Inquiry commences, findings established. Qala ma khatbukunna iz ra'awtunna Yusufa an nafsihi qulna hasha lillah ma alimna alayhi min su'in qalate amratul azize alana hasal haqqu ana rawattuhu an nafsihi wa innahu la minas sadiqin. The king investigated this case himself and said to those women, state truthfully that when you desired to divert Yusuf from his intent, then what occurred at that time? They said, Hasha lillah, that is Allah preserve us, we did not see anything evil in Yusuf, he is completely innocent. On hearing this, the wife of Aziz also became forced to speak, and with lowered gaze and trembling lips, she said, now that the truth has become disclosed in this way, I should accept that it was indeed myself who desired to lure Yusuf. Undoubtedly, Yusuf is completely truthful in his statement. The second verse is ذَلِكَ لِيَعْلَمَ أَنِّي لَمْ أَخُنْهُ بِالْغَيْبِ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي كَيْدَ الْخَائِنِينَ. Now, this is from the direction of Yusuf himself. At this, Yusuf said that I also emphasized on the reinvestigation of this case so that my patron and benefactor, the Aziz, may know that I did not go behind his back and betray his trust, and that the law of requital of Allah never allows those who betray trust to succeed. The betrayal of trust was by his wife, and she stands before us empty-handed and unsuccessful, whereas I was trustworthy and ultimately success was my share alone. Inquiry exposes injustice done to Yusuf, he stands vindicated. The Quran has not given details of the duration for which this inquiry was held. Nominating someone impartial to hold this inquiry, it must have been done by the king. Gathering of evidence through statements of all those who were involved, the statements of everyone who was involved, including those judges who made the decision, and of course, including Yusuf himself. Circumstantial evidence must have been looked at, and then a report must have been presented formally with the findings and maybe recommendations. And recommendation must be to declare Yusuf innocent. It could have been a few weeks, and these inquiries from our own experience here normally take time. So the point we should keep it in mind is, however, Yusuf was not in a hurry as the matter was to bring out haqq and expose batil. He remains in the prison during this period. So he stays in the prison. For a bigger cause, we had to sacrifice. So the significance is not that he should have come out of the prison immediately. The issue was far bigger. Even through this inquiry, Yusuf would have learned an important aspect about the way affairs of the state are conducted. See, if this inquiry was not held and Yusuf had come out, all of this wouldn't have happened. And this was part of bringing out the conclusion of the law of requital. This experience is invaluable as later he himself conducts an inquiry into the affairs of his brothers, and details are later. The inquiry must have highlighted some important weaknesses in the system of justice and society at large, which would have served as an evidence for the king. So when Yusuf is going to meet up with the king, these things must have come for discussion as well. And Yusuf would have used this evidence and some other evidences which he must have collected to discuss it with the king. This could be a point of agenda in subsequent meetings between the king, his court officials, and Yusuf later. More details in our next talk. The next verse is, the wife of Aziz gives her statement, the law of requital completes its action. وَمَا بَرِّيُّ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Now, some associate this statement with the wife of Aziz. Some associate it with as if Allah has said it, particularly in the nafs al-amaratun bis-su'i illa ma rahima rabbi. So let's have a look on its interpretation. The wife of Aziz continued her account and stated that I do not claim to be innocent. My nafs misguided me. The reality is that the hedonistic desires of man provoke him towards evil. Only that person can remain protected from this on whom is the rahmat of Allah. Only he is the one who gives protection and provides rahmat against these kinds of errors. For us, the way I take it, that first one, of course, this is Wama Abarriyu Nafsi, that she admits that she has made a mistake. And I do not claim to be innocent, my nafs misguided me. The second part is that our nafs, when it is unguided, it can direct us towards doing wrong. But a lot of people do right as well, because they, within the values of a state, you will see that if there are two people who are under a similar circumstances, one will do wrong and some will not do wrong. So over here, this looks like that it is a statement by the wife of the Aziz. And of course, Inna Rabbi Ghafurur Rahim, this can be construed as from Allah, Inna Rabbi Ghafurur Rahim. But when she says Rabbi, that is my Rabb, then it is possible that by then she had reflected over it and she understood that she is wrong. And there is a possibility of getting some protection and getting possibility of coming out of it, what she has done. But Quran hasn't gone into the details of this. Wife of Aziz helps complete the inquiry, some reflections. Human nafs without the guidance of Allah can incite towards wrong. However, this is not a default state of ours. I makes choices according to one's desires at a point in time that is dependent on our values. The wife of Aziz chose to do what she did, and this had consequences for Yusuf and her own self, and of course for her husband as well. The other two stages of human nafs are also mentioned in the Quran, which is verse 75:2 and 89:27, that is nafs al-lawama and nafs al-mutmainna. Fundamentally, there is no guidance within us, that is, as human beings, we have choice and intent, so we do not have any guidance built within us. And what we call conscience is, as per Iqbal's word, society internalized. So whatever are the values of the society and family in which we are brought up, those become our conscience essentially. And that is why people, if they feel guilt, it is because of the values in which they are brought up. Our conscience is formed by the environment in which we live. The Quran invites us to change it and bring it in line with its value system to benefit from it. Next is the verse itself explains that our self, if guided by Wahi, comes under the rahmat of Allah, and this is where we make correct decisions. Those decisions which lead to balanced outcomes. Next is the law of requital finally caught up with the wife of Aziz and the other women within the context of the justice system of the king. However, the selves of these ladies had the impact of all that they did. Now, these ladies and those people who did wrong to Yusuf, of course, they hurt their own self. And the Quran is silent on that, but we can always conclude that that with Yusuf being around, they can always find out that what exactly is the wahi of Allah and what should they do. The Quran has revealed the facts of this account of Yusuf as a guidance for Rasulullah and Jamaat al-Mu'mineen at that time, and for all those coming later, that is including us, until the last man on this planet. So there may be far more than what I have been able to conclude from these verses. So we should not, we should always think through it, and with the passage of time, with more experience and education, we may be able to add more to it. Summary so far, and next phase of the life of Yusuf commences. So from here, Yusuf's next phase of life commences, because he comes out of the prison and now he is going to meet up with the king. And we will discuss that in our next presentation. First point is Yusuf is in possession of a self which becomes eligible for power, and this is due to his iman and salih deeds, which lead to his inclusion among Muslimin. It is a well-defined path for all of us. We have seen that what Yusuf is going through and the way he is using wahi and the permanent values to confront the challenges which are coming to him, all of us can do it. And the whole point of sharing this presentation is that we will do it, because we have now gained far better understanding of the Quran than when we started. We will again look at these aspects towards the end of Surah Yusuf. There is nothing which Yusuf did in those circumstances which the Quran has shared with us, which we cannot do as Muslimin. So all of us are endeavoring to become Muslimin. The issue here is not that we need similar circumstances in life to become like Yusuf. So we should not think like this, that some woman has to come towards me attracted and then I will become Yusuf. That's not an issue here. The issue over here is that whatever Yusuf did by using wahi, according to the circumstances in which we are living our life, we have to confront batil and stand up for haq. So that is the message we are carrying out of this account of Yusuf. Each messenger of Allah faced different challenges in their life, some of which are quoted in the Quran as an illustration to help us understand, while many others are not quoted in the Quran, but the permanent values remain the same, which each messenger applied to the situations they faced during the journey of their lives. Now, finally, what I have done is, where is Yusuf in this account so far in the surah? I added it because I thought an illustration is important. So let us look at it, where Yusuf is and what phases he has gone through. Timeline of the phases of Yusuf's life so far. First is Yusuf chooses to be different and starts to benefit from the guidance of wahi from his father Yaqub. A point can arise that Yusuf may be in an advantageous position because he was born in the family of someone who already had wahi. But point over here is that if he had that advantage, why his brothers did not make use of it? So that is the point before us. So the question which we should ask is that does it make any difference? And if we see our own path, which we have adopted, we have seen the opposition which comes even from our own families, our own friends around us, even people in whose religion we are brought up, and how much they oppose the pure Quranic message. So that is the point we should keep it in mind, that it is not a question of that he was in an advantageous position, but he picked it up. The others refused to pick it up, and because of his becoming a moment, others in fact tried to get rid of him. Yusuf's brothers do not approve of this conduct of his and his father and conspire against Yusuf. See, because he is now going for pure wahi, the others have started opposing him and decide to drop him in a well. Next is Yusuf is picked up by a passing caravan and is sold as a slave in Egypt. He is brought by Aziz. I've given it a dark color because this is the darkness of Yusuf's brothers. And of course, the caravan people were very emotive and they didn't care. They just wanted to get some money and hand over Yusuf to whomever comes first. Yusuf, through his efforts, despite gains education, training, develops himself to become Mohsin. This prepares him for the coming challenges of life. Very important, because if we do not become Mohsin, we are not included in that, then when the challenges come, we will not be able to deal with them effectively. Because Challenges come from right, left, and center in any Iblisi system, and we don't know. They come unexpectedly as well. Sometimes we can forecast, but other times we may not. The bottom line is that we should be able to stand up against Batil. That is the bottom line. Yusuf is confronted with a major challenge from the side of the wife of Aziz. He proves his innocence by staying firmly on the values of Wahi. Next is Yusuf faces another concerted effort of Batil to implicate him in another conspiracy by women in power. He refuses and lands in prison. So over here, I've given a green color to, this was the short period of time or a number of years in which he had a slight respite where he was growing up from a youth to and attaining adulthood, where Quran says that he became one of those who are Muslimin. And last stage over here is Yusuf asks for an inquiry from the king and stands vindicated by an impartial inquiry. The women accept their deliberate plotting against Yusuf. So Law of Requital has completed its phase over here that he stands vindicated, he comes out of the prison, and women, they accept their guilt and they admit that they did wrong to him. And with that, we come to the end of this part of Surah Yusuf. Thanks for your time and for sharing this presentation with me.